Welcome to Divine Love Talk with Dr. Parthenia Grant, where we talk about health, well-being, and the love of the divine that exists in all of us. Now, here's your host, Dr. Parthenia Grant.
Welcome to Divine Love Talk. Dr. Parthenia Grant is out in Sedona today, and so it's Dr. Sarah Larson, her co-host, and Kim Michaels in studio. We have Marty Eddington, who is a personal longevity expert. I'm so excited for today's show. Today we're going to cover all the principles of personal longevity. We're also going to talk about immortality and bring in spiritual practices that extend your life. And so thank you for joining us, Marty. I hope it's okay to call you Marty. I feel like we've been working together for so long.
Yes, thank you. It's a real pleasure to see you here, and thank you for inviting me.
It's an honor to have you here. What you've developed is so beautiful. Marty Ellington can be found at www.personal-longevity.com. And you've written several books about longevity and other books as well, Immortality. Tell us about some of the books that you've written.
Well, the first one I wrote on the subject was called Physical Immortality, History and How-To Guide, and it goes back to some research I did starting in 2008. And I found a lot of records of very long-lived people. The reason I did that was that I'd always been a student of spiritual growth and metaphysics since I was a teenager, and I'd heard that in India there were yogis who claimed to live to several hundred years old. So I started to research that as a possible subject for my book, and I found out there were people all over the world that had lived to tremendous ages, which nobody believed. And so that became the basis for what I was doing, and I really came up with a theory I've called synchronization, the synchronization of the spirit, the vital forces, and the physical body to enable long-term health, plus other issues of psychology and life purpose and things. So there's a lot more to get into, but that was how I got started.
That's so awesome. I love the story that you shared about when you were 4 years old, and quite often I feel that our purpose is instilled in us we come in with that. And I love the story about when you were 4 years old.
Yes, it's really interesting because I guess it indicated this was going to be my career from that time. I lived in upstate New York, and my mother used to take me to this place called Harris Hill near Elmira, which was the glider capital of the world. She took me there to ride ponies. But one day I was up on the field looking at the gliders taking off, and remember, I'm 4 years old. I don't know anything. I don't know if I've ever even started kindergarten. And I saw this tall, gray-haired man talking to some people on the field, and I don't know why, but I went up to him and I said, "Are you the man who lives forever?" And he gave me this strange look, and then my mother saw what I was doing and dragged me away. But later on, many years later, I read that there's a possible very long-lived person who could be as much as 1,000 years old living in that area. So who knows? So maybe that was my first encounter with a very long-lived person.
And it's so amazing. In India, there are quite a few elders, and I like to point out there are so many among us here as well. I'd love to bring Kim Michaels in. Kim, are you on the line?
Yes, I'm here.
Oh, welcome from Estonia. We're so grateful that we get to have you here on this show, and you're with Transcendence Toolbox. I found you on Facebook today, which was so wonderful just to like you on Facebook. What do you think of personal longevity? How old would you want to live to? And what have you met some long-lived or older than 100-year-old centurions?
I haven't personally met anybody who's that old, but I know that there are many spiritual teachings that say that the kind of the natural lifespan of the human body is 120 years, that's what it's designed to do. Of course, there are also many spiritual teachings that say that in previous ages it was normal to live for 800 to 900 years, which you can even find in the Bible, that Methuselah and other people at that time lived for that kind of a lifespan.
I remember reading, I believe it was Moses at 900 and so many others in Bible stories. What are some of the ways that you find in Estonia? What are some of the thought beliefs around personal longevity there? And you've lived all over the world, Montana, Danish, Denmark. What are some of those that we see around the world on this?
Well, I think most people around the world are they have been so programmed with the normal beliefs about longevity and the normal lifespan being around 70, 80 years or so that they really can't conceive of much beyond that. And I think that's a big part of why we don't live longer, because we are simply in our minds, we are putting all these limitations on ourselves. And I think the most important thing to long life is that you renew yourself spiritually, because that's the only way to avoid putting all of this limiting energy on the physical body. And if we keep piling on emotional energy throughout a lifetime, it will get to a point where the cells of the body are so affected by this that they just can't handle it anymore. And I think that's why our view of immortality and of ourselves and who we are, most people don't see themselves as spiritual beings, but as human beings. And I think that view becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, really.
Thank you. That's so awesome that you've shared that. That's how Marty and I met originally. Marty came to interview me for a TV show. And could you talk a little bit about that?
Yes. I had several concepts for trying to deal with extreme longevity on television, and a producer friend of mine and I got together, and we had a concept of trying to find and interview in what we are called immortalists, people who believed in the concepts of extended longevity and were trying to practice it in their life. And there's groups like this all over the world, and so we started looking for people to talk to, and Ron Holman, who we both know, referred me to you, and we came in and did an interview with you. And then, I found out how wonderful a person you were and how spiritual, and since we become good friends. But that was how we got started with that. But we didn't sell the show, though, at this time. Maybe we'll sell it in the future.
Which is this beautiful show for different, on immortality, with producers of, like, Discovery Channel. Your friend has produced quite a few interesting shows out. And I think we met through this Immortality group that meets. And it's so important to have these groups to renew yourself spiritually. One of the things that I know for sure is when we accomplish something, an inner happiness expands within us when we do something that we once thought was impossible. And that's one of the reasons, that's one of the 10 principles that you share on personal longevity or immortality. The first one being real long-lived persons exist.
Yes, and I'd like to address something I've been thinking about having to do with biology, because in my philosophy, I try and incorporate a lot of what's been learned about science and medicine, too. One of the things I researched back when I was doing my book, and I've been reviewing this recently, was about long-lived plants and animals, because we all have the same cellular biology. And there are turtles and whales that live to 300 or 400 years old. That's well known. And then when you talk about plants, there's a certain type of pine tree that lives up in the Sierras that's known to be 7,000 years old.
Yes.
And then you look at single-celled animals like parameciums that are basically immortal. They basically just divide to live. So if people have the concept, like Kim was saying, that you can only live to 70 or 80, but when you look at cell biology and the physical limits of what can happen in your body, there's really no physical limit. We are still exploring the limits. And one of the questions I like to ask people a lot is, do you know what the average lifespan was of people in the United States in 1900?
I love that question. It's one of the ones that really expand us. And what's the answer to that?
Well, a lot of people will guess 50, 60, even 70, but actually the actual lifespan, the average lifespan was only 40 years old. So,
and I love that. I love 100 years ago, it was only 40 years old. And I think of Ben Franklin and our forefathers that lived into what we would consider old age now. And they had expansive thinking. along with all of these other, but it's so important to get. 100 years ago, it was only 40.
Right.
February 2011's cover of Time magazine had us living to 125 years old minimum. If you're alive and well and you avoid accidents, you can go on forever, is what that article also mentioned.
Yeah, I think that we have tremendous potential for extending our lives in a healthy way. You know, another thing that a lot of people say is, well, I don't want to live longer because I don't want to be infirm and unable to exercise or move around. But the records I found of people, and I've got pictures and bios and even videos, I recently showed you some videos of people who live well past the age of 150. And there's even records of people who've lived 250 years. I mean, these are a video. We've got a video of a guy that was that old, pictures, bios.
You've got some of that on your personal website as well, personal-longevity.com.
Yeah, I've got some information there. I'm adding more. I've got it on, a lot of it's on another website because this is a fairly new one. But yes, people have lived a long time, and that's the first principle of personal longevity, to convince people, to show them really, to remove their limiting belief about longevity, that they really can live a long time because other people have done it. And that's the place to start.
How long do you want to live, Marty?
Until my mission is done, which is I want to get this word out to people all over the world. I think it's really important that we have enough time in our lives to accomplish our purpose. Maybe that's our spiritual development, which is, I think, a fundamental thing for everybody. But maybe it's just that you want to travel the world, that you want to have multiple careers, that you want to enjoy your family in multiple generations. I mean, there's a lot of great reasons to want to have a long life.
You don't want to continue coming back. In the Hindu culture, the reincarnation, in the Buddhist cultures, coming back to experience it all in this physical form. Kim Michaels, how long would you like to live?
Well, I thought Marty's answer was really good until your mission is done. Of course, in his case, if his mission is longevity, when is it ever going to be done? But I feel exactly the same way. I mean, I see myself as a spiritual person. I have and it goes for everybody, of course. We all have a particular mission for this lifetime, and it has a low potential and it has a high potential, and I would like to fulfill the highest possible potential. It's interesting what you were talking about with longevity, because I remember even as a child learning that every 7 years, all of the cells in our body have been renewed. Isn't that right?
It is correct. I mean, we are miracles. When we were first conceived, we were just double-stranded DNA in an egg, in an ovum, and then we divided 50 times and became 100 trillion cells, which is more than all the stars in the Milky Way. And that's when we get born into existence. It's such a beautiful thing. Each of our cells do 6 trillion things per second. Go ahead.
But see, if you take that concept that our cells are renewed in a 7-year period, then you can ask yourself, well, why do we then get old?
Yes.
Why does a new cell take on a weakened and older form of the previous cell? And when you are into any kind of spirituality, any kind of connection between mind and matter, you can see that it must be because the new cells are not created in their optimum form. There's something that affects them, and that can only be our minds.
Yes, and we'll cover more of that and epigenetics and more with Marty and Kim after this break. Thank you all for joining us. You're listening to CRN Digital Talk Radio. This is Divine Love Talk. We look forward to having you call in to the show as well. And so you can call in at 800-336-2225 to join our discussion. That number again is 800-336-2225 to join us. Thank you for joining us. And welcome back to Divine Love Talk on CRN. Today we've got Marty Eddington in studio with us, Kim Michaels on the phone, and we're talking about personal longevity and immortality. And we just left the discussion off with our ability to renew ourselves, our ability. What are some of the principles that you feel, Marty, that really go into personal longevity. I think we covered one is that belief system, believing that it exists. And then you've got the second principle is defining your purpose in life.
Yes, one of the things I realized when I was putting this program together, because I've got an online training system and also deliver it in person, is that people have to have a purpose in their lives to go on. They have to have a reason to live. Otherwise, the whole rest of it doesn't make any sense. And actually, I had a really interesting discussion last night. I was having Easter dinner with my parents and a family friend, and I asked them the question because they're both in their late 70s or 80s, and I'm expecting to be doing some talks at some retirement communities, and I should back up and say that the manager of the retirement community that I had talked to agreed with me completely that one of the big problems of people there is that they have a lack of purpose in their life. So my question was, how can you give people that are elderly and not very mobile purpose in their life? And our family friend who had recently had his wife die and had gone through a year of depression, now is recovering, had a really interesting answer about that. He said that you have to be able to look outside yourself and take care of something that you care about, whether it's animals or family or some passion that you have of a hobby. And that's how you get meaning in your life and have purpose when you're older.
To be of service to something greater than yourself allows you to have that. And I believe that's one of the fundamental things that allows our cells to renew itself. When you get excited and your life force, your chi, your prana is engaged in producing something much larger than you could on your own, giving of its life force. So that's one of the biggest keys in renewing your cells, having a new body being formed, is when you're so passionate about what you're working on, it continually renews you. And epigenetics, that the way that we talk to ourselves, Bruce Lipton's work, the coding on top of our genes is really, really important as well, that produces the results from our cells, those 6,000 different things that 60,000 different things that each of our cells can do. Kim Michaels, I'd love to bring you in on this discussion of life purpose or purpose in life.
Yeah, well, I have several times read about, seen on TV, and I've talked to people in person as well who are suffering from some kind of illness or have had a severe accident. And the consistent, I think, opinion of doctors is that your ability to heal and survive depends on whether you have something to live for. And I've said before on the show that I think one of the great crimes, if you will, of one of the great lacks of our modern society is that it doesn't give people a sense of purpose and meaning in life. And the reason for that is we don't have spiritual beliefs. We don't know who we are. What kind of beings are we? Are we created by some remote God who will send us to hell if we don't do what he commands in a scripture that's several thousand years old and have no connection to how we live today? Are we evolved monkeys living in a random universe? Marty was saying just before that we must have a connection to something outside of ourselves, and that reminded me of what I think is one of the great laws of nature, namely the second law of thermodynamics, which says that a closed system will always self-destruct. And I think when we get older, we tend to become more closed systems, just like Marty was talking about. We don't have anything that reaches beyond ourselves, but if we have a spiritual outlook, we will.
I think this is a great place to come into that, how to enable your life urge, which is the third principle that you talk about. Thank you, Kim, for that closed system and service to outside yourself. How do you enable your life urge, Marty?
Well, let me first back up and talk about what that principle is all about. It's not original with me. There's a gentleman named Leonard Orr who's been teaching rebirthing since the 1970s, and he came up with something called removing the death urge. And this is another way of stating it in a more positive manner, but we're really programmed from birth in our society to expect we're going to go through certain stages in our life and then die. And we can reprogram ourselves so that that's not the case.
And that's so beautiful. Thank you. Reprogramming, we'll talk more about that after these messages coming up. We're talking to Marty Eddington from Longevity, personal-longevity.com. You've written several books. We're so glad that you're here. Kim Michaels from Transcendent Toolbox. You're listening to Divine Love Talk with Parthenia Grant and Dr. Sarah Larson. And welcome back to Divine Love Talk on CRN. We're talking to Martin Eddington on personal longevity and immortality. And our discussion has come into enabling your life urge.
Yes, and before the break, I was talking about how we're programmed by our society to expect to live certain stages of our life and die. I thought I'd use a couple examples.
It's so great that our producer just walked in and shared with us how last night he was thinking about how fear comes in. Every decision he makes, fear is such a big component. Fear of death, programmed to think at 50 is middle age, 60, oh my gosh, retirement age, 70, 80s, you're getting old and aging, and death really comes in. No one wants to make it past that, is part of the fear as well. And so it's so enabling your life urge. Yeah,
so the examples I'd like to use is one cemetery company that I won't say the name of has had ads on the radio here in Los Angeles for quite a while where they say, you're getting up there in your 50s and 60s, and so come on in and buy a plot. So what type of programming is that giving you for the expectancy in your life? And then another example that many people may have experienced. When I had a paper route when I was a kid, I used to call on this elderly couple in their 80s named the Barus. They were family friends, and they were very vital and alive until the husband died of something. I don't remember what it was. But then every week as I'd go back for my collections, the woman who'd been married to him for a long time, she kind of shriveled up and died within 6 months. Why? Because she lost her will to live. Yes. She just didn't want to live anymore.
I love one of the videos that you shared with us, or one of this people that lived for a really long time. He had something like 20, the Chinese gentleman who had 23 wives and so many children. And I just think about my husband's grandfather had a wife at age 80. He remarried his second wife at age 80. Cool. And if we think along those lines, how much can you love at age 5? And that's so different from the way that you can love at age 15 versus the way that you love at 35. And for me personally, my life urge is to see how deeply I can serve and how deeply I can love. And for my personal mission is for all of us to recognize our oneness, this one love, one being. And so that I love with knowing without doubt that you will live a long, happy life. For me, I know every day I'm working more and more going into that. What are some of the spiritual practices, Kim Michaels, that you feel would help you enable your life urge?
Well, I think spiritual practices, I always have found that the most important thing for me is to keep your energy field clear of any kind of the negative energy that builds up. And that's why I have a lot of tools on Transcendence Toolbox, but there are certainly many other tools out there that people can use. But it's like we were talking about earlier, with the cells that must take on an older imperfect matrix. When a new cell is created, it's not created in its purest form. And where does that come from? Well, it comes from the mind. It starts in the mind, but the cells are physical, and the bridge between the mind and the physical body is emotional and mental energy. Because if we look at it realistically, energy is stepped down in various stages. And even Einstein's theory of relativity says that if you play with the math. And so that's why I feel that learning how to keep your emotional and mental bodies and even your higher identity body as clear as possible from accumulated energy, I feel that's a vital step.
That's so, and I think that's the story that you were sharing, Marty, with the woman, your neighbors, that her emotional and mental energy was so connected to her husband's that was part of her shriveling up that urge.
That's right.
The fourth principle is you have the importance of a spiritual connection. What are some of the practices that you do to keep your spirit connected?
Well, I'll talk about that, but I'd like to state that this is a generic thing. I think all three of us believe that we all have a core spirit that is and lives in a timeless realm and that it lasts forever. I know a lot of people don't believe that, but I really think that having that belief, having that understanding is very important. It really doesn't matter if you practice a traditional religion or what religion you do. It can be a form of deep prayer. It can be meditation. Personally, I like to meditate. It can be something as simple as communing with nature, walking in the woods and just enjoying the fresh air and the outdoors. But by being close to your spiritual center, by being connected to it, that seems to do something to bring health down into your body. I know that when I have a very deep meditation and I follow the right practices, I just feel much healthier afterwards. And it's hard to explain. It's a type of thing, because I'm an engineer and I really like to be able to measure things. There's not really any good instruments to measure how well the spirit is in your body, but I know you both understand the importance of that, and so maybe you'd like to elaborate on your own side about that.
Oh, I love, we're spiritual beings having a spiritual experience. We've never been born, we'll never die. We take on this body in form because we so wanted to experience the things that you get to experience as a human, spiritual being. Kim Michaels, I'd love for you to expand on that.
Well, I was wondering, actually, Marty was saying that about measuring things. I wonder if you have heard, Marty, about a lady called Valerie Hunt, who actually wrote a book, which I can't remember right now the name of it, but she used various scientific instruments to actually measure the human energy field. I wonder if you ever heard about her.
Not her. I have heard of different ways of measuring the energy body around us. I was thinking more of the higher level spiritual connection that we all have too.
Which is, I love Valerie Hunt's work, and scalar energy kind of comes out of that. And we're going to have so many discussions on the show. That would be a great topic to begin. She was a scientist and an author and a professor out of Los Angeles, and you can measure consciousness. And each of us can every day by our own, within ourselves, to notice how happy we are, how centered we go throughout our day, how much we've connected to the present moment, how often we've actually been here, and how long time feels. When I'm actually present at moment to moment, I've had such a full day of experiences, and that's measuring that out, I think, is an individual thing that we can do with these spiritual practices. I want to just share again that you're listening to Divine Love Talk on CRN. Our guest is personal longevity expert Martin Eddington, and he can be found on personal-longevity.com. We also have with us Dr. Kim Michaels from Estonia. And I am your host today, Dr. Sarah Larson. I can be found at drsarahlarson.com. Parthenia is off and enjoying Sedona, Arizona. We're so grateful that this show, Divine Love Talk, is here, and that you guys are joining us. And again, you can call in 800-336-2225 to join the show. I'd love to hear more about the importance of spiritual connection. I know, Kim, you're such a brilliant expert on the spirit. What are some of the ways that you some of the tools that you have?
Well, I agree with Marty that deep meditation is very important, and I think meditating on the self and what the self is can be very fruitful. I mean, I have a spiritual model on transcendencetoolbox.com that talks about the fact that we all have a spiritual self which is immortal and which exists in a higher realm. But then I also actually teach on there that we are not actually what we normally believe we are as spiritual beings, because often even as spiritual beings, we think we are a soul that came into this body and has come into different bodies before. But I actually teach that we are not really the soul, because the soul is almost like the body, a vehicle we have taken on. But if we go to the core of what we are pure awareness.
Yes.
And we are really meant to be an open door for the spiritual self. And you will find similar concepts in almost all the mystical traditions of the world, that if you really ask what the self is, it's just that, pure awareness. And Marty was talking about that. You go into deep meditation. You were talking about yourself also, that when you have this sense of connectedness, that's really, to me, the key to longevity. It's the key to spirituality, because you're not theorizing anymore. And I think it's very important. You can't intellectualize yourself to spiritual growth. You have to experience. And what you really have to experience is that there is something beyond your outer self, your outer awareness, and it's real. That's what shifts you.
So that sense of connectedness to all things and the shift. Did you experience the shift, Marty?
Yeah, maybe that brings us into the next principle about having love in your heart, or unconditional love, because I used to think that was something theoretical. I used to think it was like a philosophy of how you relate to people. But I found out in the last couple of years it was much more than that. It's actually a spiritual event that happens to you, where some people don't like the word chakras, but I'll use that because that's the best way to explain it, where your heart chakra opens and you feel this energy flowing into you that is like, the best way to describe it is it's bliss, it's pure happiness. And when you have that experience, then that makes you a lot more connected to everybody around you. It kind of creates another dimension that you relate to people. I know for myself that I was one of these more needy guys in terms of needing relationships, and having been through a divorce and everything, and I'm looking for new relationships. But I realized that I was looking in a very limited perspective, that really by having this unconditional love in your life, it makes it more fulfilling, and you automatically relate to people in a much better way. That's why I thought it was so important. I broke it out as a separate principle. It's part of the spiritual connection, but it's a specific set of practices you can do to learn how to open your heart. I know that you teach people a lot about that, Sarah, and other people do too. And I thought it was so important that I put it in as a separate principle of longevity, because once you feel that energy entering you, it like vitalizes you, it improves your immune system, makes you happier, and of course happiness also relates to your will to live. So that's how I've experienced it, and I'm still learning about this, but I've had some great experiences of it, and I recommend everybody that they should have that as a goal for themselves too.
And so unconditional love being so connected to your heart opening and your ability to feel compassion for all sentinel, all feeling beings, and to experience when someone else in that nearby you is experiencing something, being able to experience what it's like to be in their shoes in some format. And that's so important. And I believe one of the things that really helped me is every time I met someone, I've felt in my heart I would know this person for the rest of my life. Whether it was a person at a counter, that either one of us would be the same after this encounter. We would go on carrying some form of each other everywhere we went from that moment forward. And what are some of the things that you do for unconditional love, Kim?
Well, I actually believe that much of the problems that we are having in today's Western world is that we are so identified with the body and the outer self. And I see us, as I said, I see that what actually comes into embodiment originally is this pure self. And what happens is we then, in order to integrate with the physical body, we create this self. And most of us think we are that outer self because over lifetimes we have invested so much in it. We have put so much thought and emotional energy into this that it just sucks up our attention completely. We're completely identified with the outer self. So I have always felt that the most practical thing you could do is, as I said, reduce that mental and emotional energy by invoking spiritual light from your spiritual self. As soon as you clear out some of the static in your emotional and mental minds, you will start getting a greater connection to your spiritual self, because that's the natural state. So it's like a matter of returning to the natural state. And for me, honestly, I feel that the greatest thing that I do, along with my continuous spiritual practice of invoking energy, is just to try to be still and just really, I feel that if I send love to God, there is a return current. And that's, I think, is exactly what you were describing yourself, that your heart chakra is opened and you really feel that connectedness. Because that's the beauty, that's the one unifier behind everything. Our outer selves are probably never going to agree on everything. But if we know we are more than that, then we can agree, we can come into union, even though we are still different.
I love the subtle energies that we are as well. We are all this combined, so many subtle energies. And in the energy field, when you're feeling unconditional love, that's something that can be measured, how brilliantly your body is responding, infections. When you're able to feel that compassion and especially self-love, you tend to feel so much better, that divine love. And you are listening to Divine Love on CRN Network. This is Dr. Sarah Larson. We're so glad you're here. After the break, we're going to cover more of these principles, and we're going to have Martin Eddington back on soon, our show again. Join us after these messages. And welcome back to Divine Love Talk on CRN. This is Dr. Sarah Larson, filling in for Dr. Parthenia Grant in this chair. We've got Martin Eddington with us talking about personal longevity. And you wanted to share something with the audience.
Yes, I mean, I know that our time is limited for the show's starting to wrap up. But I really believe in these principles that I developed through many years of experience, spiritual experiences, my research. Being an engineer, I'm very analytical, so I wanted to try and answer the question of, after I'd found all these long-lived people records, how could I provide a philosophy for people that would help them with their own longevity and long-term health and happiness. So that's what the 10 principles are all about. And
we're going to have more of those principles next week with Parthenia is back. Dr. Grant is back. And Kim Michaels, I wanted to bring you in this last segment. What do you want to leave the audience with for this week?
Well, I would say that you are already immortal. There is a part of you that is immortal that, never was born, never can die, as it says in Hinduism. And when you connect to that and realize that this is really who you are, then you begin to experience spiritual immortality. And then the physical immortality will either follow or it won't really matter, because you will move exactly where you're supposed to move.
And that's what I'd love to leave the audience with, is you are a miracle. Your cells, every part of you is amazing. If all your DNA was stretched out, it would reach the moon 6,000 times. Your brain has about 100 billion nerve cells, and you can think more thoughts, feel more things than there is particulate matter in the universe. All you have to do is tune in to yourself and really listen to what your heart is saying, what you're experiencing within yourself, to really know and experience your own personal immortality, your own personal levels of happiness and wellness. And with all of this, the most important thing is finding what drives you to be more blissful, more happy in the immortal part of yourself. And so we want to thank you guys for joining us today.
Thank you.
Marty, what's the best way to connect with you?
Best way to connect with me is on my website, again, personal-longevity.com. And I've got some information on there. I'm going to be adding more about a lot of records of long-lived people and other things you can download. I'll be adding more materials this week because it's a fairly new site. But I want everybody to take a look. You can also sign up for my e-course. I've got an online e-course with videos and downloadable materials to help you understand the 10 principles better.
Wonderful. And we're so grateful, Kim Michaels. Thank you for joining us from Estonia. And he can be found on transcendencetoolbox.com. Thank you, Kim Michaels.
You're welcome.
And you can find me, Dr. Sarah Larson, at www.drsarahlarson.com. Thank you all for joining us today. Next week, we're going to talk more with Martin Eddington on personal longevity. And Dr. Grant will be back. Thank you to all of our friends across the country that have been writing in and liking us on Facebook. We want you to find CRN. We want you to find Divine Love Talk and like us on Facebook and give us your comments. We're really interested in hearing what you have to say. And have a great week.